What if everything you've been taught about greatness is wrong? While Jesus was talking about suffering and death, his disciples were arguing about which of them was the greatest. And instead of rebuking them with power, Jesus pulls a child into the middle of the room and flips the entire value system of the world upside down. We're studying Mark 9:33 to 37. Let's read verse 33. And they came to Capernaum. And when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" They arrived back at Capernaum, Jesus' home base in Galilee, and after he and his disciples were in the house. Wait a minute. Which house? Whose house? In the early chapters of Mark's Gospel, Jesus seemed to use the home of Simon and Andrew as his home base. Perhaps that is where they are now. After the disciples were gathered inside the house, without an onlooking crowd, Jesus asked them what they had been talking about while the group had been walking to Capernaum. Do you think Jesus didn't know? Or was this a rhetorical question? Let me know in the comments. Let's move on to verse 34. But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. So we know they weren't silent while walking here, but now they've become silent when asked about their conversation. Mark tells us that the disciples had argued with one another. It was a dispute with give and take from multiple participants. And what was at the heart of the argument? Which one of them was the greatest? One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Peter Senge. In the absence of a great dream, pettiness prevails. Jesus had earlier explained that he was on a mission, and that mission would cause men to reject him, betray him, and kill him. And after 3 days, he would rise again. But his disciples weren't discussing his mission. They were debating their relative positions within his organization. Pettiness was prevailing. Why were they arguing? A few things had happened recently that may have contributed to the conflict. First, when Jesus asked the disciples who they thought he was, Peter, the first person Jesus called as a disciple, put himself forward and answered, "You are the Christ." Then, when Jesus explained that being the Christ meant he had a rendezvous with a cross in his future, Peter again spoke up and rebuked Jesus. So Peter has been acting the part of a leader among the group. Also, when Jesus raised Jairus' daughter from the dead, he brought only Peter, James, and John into the house with him, leaving the rest of the disciples outside. Then, when Jesus was transfigured on a mountaintop, and God spoke directly to the disciples, it was only Peter, James, and John who Jesus had brought up the mountain with him. So they had concrete evidence that they were not all equal in their Master's eyes and in his plans for them. Finally, remember that the popular expectations were that the Messiah would be a political and military leader, like King David. And King David's close confidants were placed in leadership positions in his kingdom. So, human nature being what it is, the disciples were trying to figure out where they each stood in the pecking order of the Messiah's impending kingdom. Notice that Mark doesn't attribute any particular argument to any specific disciple. Why do you think that is? Could it be that everyone had some part in the argument, and that the specifics didn't matter as much as the fact that they were all interested in this question of greatness? Perhaps. How did Jesus deal with this? Look at verse 35. And he sat down and called the 12. And he said to them, "If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all." There's an important translation issue here. Mark wrote in Greek, "If anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all, and servant of all." Why does this matter? Because desire speaks to a person's aspirations and wants. Any of the disciples who have an internal wish to rise to a position of prominence shall, in fact, be the last of all and the servant of all. Jesus is not operating within a kingdom of striving for position. Greatness isn't what he's here for or concerned with. And if his disciples are focused on a desire for greatness, they are operating outside of the Messiah's mission and message. Notice the word servant. It literally means table servant. When Jesus fed two different multitudes, he had the disciples distribute the bread and fish like table servants, and then gather up the leftovers. They have practical experience with Jesus that they are supposed to serve people, not be served. Striving to climb some imaginary ladder will only guarantee a fall. But wait, Jesus isn't finished. Look at verses 36 and 37. And he took a child and put him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. In our modern world, we think of children as a symbol of innocence and purity, but in the first century, children were without status, powerless, having no basis for honor, and viewed primarily as the property of their fathers. So by bringing in a child as an object lesson, Jesus wasn't lifting up an example of innocence, but of insignificance. The child represented the exact opposite of greatness. Instead of arguing about who is the greatest, make yourselves servants of even the most insignificant of people. And by receiving and serving the least significant, Jesus says, you'll be receiving me, and in doing so, you'll be receiving the one who sent me. If God is the greatest of all, by focusing on servanthood to the least significant, they won't be making themselves great, but they will be receiving the greatest of all. So what did Jesus do here? He rejected the entire value system and concept of status that the disciples had brought with them when they became his followers. That's a great lesson for us, too. The things that are important in the world may not be important in God's kingdom. The expectations that we brought with us may be setting us up for disappointment. We may find out that the ladder we think we're supposed to climb leads directly to last place. And if we embrace being last and serving others, even the most seemingly insignificant, we'll be serving God and His Christ. Being last doesn't sound so bad. Next time, Jesus will teach the disciples who is or isn't on His team. Thanks for studying with me. Please tell your friends about this channel.